There's not a lot of conversation necessary. You don't have to speak the same language. You don't have to be able to know, what everybody's CV is. You have that musical connection. You have that. You feel. You feel it in the earth here. You feel it in the air here. That energy, that presence of the ancestors, that presence of these traditions that have been retained and maintained through centuries of struggle and persecution that somehow have survived anyway. It's the same as in Brazil. And that is a very distinct vibration that those who've experienced it know how to identify.
We take 4 musicians and a professor of history from northeastern Brazil. These 4 musicians are very similar in their experience to the musicians' experience that my peer musicians in New Orleans. They're professors, they teach music, they perform on a very high level, they're well studied, and they're essentially in the same generation as myself and my peers. But it was interesting to bring them for the first time to New Orleans and to see how they immediately just immersed themselves into the music and how exciting that experience was for them.
Different styles. This is kind of churrish. Okay. Oh, okay.
Improvisação.
Tá.
Parte A, parte C.
Sim.
The exchange lasted for 2 weeks. The first week was spent in Houston, Texas, and our home base, if you will, academic home base, was Texas Southern University, historically black university in Houston, Texas. That their band department is under the direction of Horace Young, and a wonderful saxophonist who's done wonderful historic projects in the past and still very active. And I was very, very open and very excited about the opportunity for his students to get a chance to mix it up with some of these musicians from Brazil.
She's saying that this is a very important moment that we start this interchange, and she's hoping that we'll grow and that we'll be part of some sort of a universal or a worldwide community of music.
Vocês não imaginam o quanto
Can't imagine how much,
esse momento está sendo importante.
how important.
We had a great time there, and they learned a lot, and they were very excited about that experience. And then we piggybacked that with a week in New Orleans. For that week, we spent time at Tulane University working with Music Rising, and also visited the University of New Orleans, which is my alma mater. And while there, we got a chance to do workshops, and we did a master class to demonstrate the music of Northeast Brazil for the student body.
Para mim está sendo muito bom nesse intercâmbio, né, assim, e é muito semelhante, pelo menos o que eu, né, vivo, entendeu? Assim, musicalmente também nós vivemos, é muito semelhante, né, nessa forma de no caso tocar, né, assim, de também, né, se interagir entre, né, os músicos aqui, certo? Eles não é uma coisa presa, não é uma coisa resumida, né? Eles vão vão no caso tocando e vai, né, assim, acontecendo naturalmente, né, assim, o groove, né, o swing, certo? Cada um tem também, né, assim, a possibilidade de fazer uma né, chamada improvisação e fica livre, ninguém fica preso a tempo, ninguém fica preso a espaço.
Estar aqui em Nova Orleans hoje, nessas tanto Nova Orleans quanto Houston, essas 2 semanas foi bastante produtivo, porque trazer essa experiência da música popular brasileira em conexão com Nova Orleans, que já é um mix cultural, já é um local, um lugar onde tem uma similaridade, uma igualdade muito grande com a música brasileira, principalmente com a cultura afro.
Da impressão que eu tive foi a melhor possível, certo? A questão, primeiramente, do clima, parecido muito com o nosso clima lá do Maranhão, especificamente da cidade de Bacabal. Muito gostoso o clima, um clima tropical. E musicalmente falando, sinceramente amei a questão da cidade de New Orleans, né? Ou Nova Orleans. Os músicos, o aconchego, a recepção, a troca de ideias, todo mundo, todos os músicos humildes, entendeu? Ao ponto de chegar, de compartilhar os seus conhecimentos musicais com a gente. Trocamos ideias. Um exemplo disso foi a jam que nós tivemos, né? Lá na casa do Scott. Nós bebemos. comemos, participamos daquele bom e velho churrasco brasileiro que ele fez em nossa homenagem e dentro daquele movimento, daquela, vamos dizer, aquela muvuca toda, né, nós tocamos, compartilhamos e ao mesmo tempo, enquanto estávamos tocando, nós trocamos ideias.
These musicians were, in particular, they were from northeast Brazil. Bacabal is a region in Maranhão.
The Northeast in general is known for, you know, their food traditions, their musical traditions, their spiritual traditions that are rooted in Africa, that have been maintained for the past 500 years.
And there's a lot of significance to that area. Namely, that area is very parallel, in a sense, to what New Orleans is to the United States. That area is for Brazil. Bahia, which is in northeast Brazil, was like the sugar hub for Brazil. That was where the slave ports all transport all the slaves. So much like New Orleans with its sugar-based colonization here, there's a lot of African retention. Now what happened is some of the slaves in that area actually escaped and formed these communities called quilombos. And those quilombos sort of acted as Congo Square acts in New Orleans historically. That's where the Africans were able to maintain their language, their culture, et cetera, et cetera.
Right, so the difference between New Orleans or Louisiana and every place else in the States is that it was colonized by the French, right, and then the Spanish. And they had a different policy than the British did. The British had a policy of divide and conquer. The French, Spanish, and Portuguese had a policy of assimilation. The French had this idea that if they encouraged people to assimilate into French culture, they would be less likely to rebel against their condition of enslavement and colonization. And the same thing in Brazil. And then with the syncretism between the Catholic Church, you know, the British were Protestant, but the French and the Portuguese and the Spanish were Catholic. And the Africans were able to hide their practices of their traditional spirituality under the guise of Catholicism, because the system with, you know, the saints as intermediaries and, you know, the African deities really worked very well together. And so I think all of that combination of factors made it possible for them to continue playing their rhythms, singing their songs, doing their dances. And so that evolved as a very integral part of what became the culture of Brazil. And, you know, eventually, like I said, you know, Bahia is the former capital. And so everything sort of spread out from there in terms of what Brazil would become.
Nova Orleans tem potencial cultural que mistura a religião, mistura a música, mistura a arte, mistura a música africana, né? Então isso faz com que se construa algo mais positivo diante do que eu já venho trabalhando, que é a questão da diáspora africana, da diáspora negra dentro da cultura maranhense. A conexão que tem com a forma, né, com os tambores, com a percussão que ele fez na apresentação, a gente percebe essa conexão que tem entre Cuba, entre a África, entre Nova Orleans e o Brasil em relação à religião do candomblé, porque é o mesmo ritmo, é a mesma energia de percussão que tem entre a religião, né, e a música.
One of the significant stories is of a musician named Luis Gonzaga. Just like we have Louis Armstrong, it's kind of strange, it's almost like parallel universes here. They had Luis Gonzaga, and Luis Gonzaga created this, or just created, but he helped to codify the music known as, the rhythms known as baião, which eventually evolved into forró and had a greater impact on samba and all these other music. So what happened is he actually left North Brazil and came south, just like Louis Armstrong left New Orleans and went up to Chicago. He went into Rio, and when he did that, he helped popularize that rhythmic energy and really create a lot of excitement about that music and created this this movement of samba and all these other music.
With the exception of the Gullah culture, you know, in the southeastern coast of the United States, New Orleans is definitely the place where African culture has been the most maintained and retained, you know, in terms of the food, the language, the music, the spiritual practices, the Mardi Gras Indian tradition.
New Orleans, as you know, is a port city and was very important as the entry point for slaves coming in for, once again, the sugar industry. Sugar plantations were very strong in Louisiana and in this region. So many of those slaves came from the same regions of West Africa. Now, having come from some of those same regions, they had very many similarities. And this is what we wanted to explore, the similarities in music. As New Orleans has created jazz, we know that Brazil is famous for samba and forró and these other musical forms that were all a result of the African experience.
Eu estou me sentindo em casa, né? Estou aqui com os meus amigos, conheci outras pessoas. E é lógico que a gente tem saudade da família da gente, né? Mas é um trabalho que a gente está fazendo, mostrando mais um pouco mais da nossa música brasileira, que também para a gente é muito importante, em poder trazer essa experiência e levar para a nossa cidade, entendeu? E muito importante mesmo, uma experiência maravilhosa, estou muito feliz.
Bom, a diferença muito assim, não é tanto não, porque aqui em Nova Orleans, eles são mais abertos, como o Fabrício falou. Eles não são na deles. A gente pode ver também que quando acaba, alguém fica já querendo saber alguma coisa, perguntar, só que o tempo é pouco. Tá sendo ótimo, porque de onde eu venho, a minha cidade, Codó, no Maranhão, é humilde, praticamente é pouco visível. E musicalmente também tem uma fama lá. Aí, pra mim, essa fama lá, a música não é tão valorizada assim. Tem poucos músicos. Aí pra mim tá sendo uma experiência muito boa, porque essa conexão de eu estar vindo lá do Maranhão, da cidade pequena, para representar um pedacinho do Maranhão, tá sendo muito, muito bom. E eu vou levar comigo isso para o resto da vida. E vou tentar e vou conseguir, com certeza, levar um pouco muito que eu aprendi aqui lá para dentro da cidade.
Eis que a minha ilusão foi dar meu coração com toda a força pra essa moça me fazer feliz. E o destino não quis me ver como raiz de uma flor de lis. E foi assim que eu vi nosso amor na poeira, poeira, morto na beleza fria de Maria. E o meu jardim da vida recebeu, morreu, do pé que brotou Maria, nem Margarida nasceu. E o meu jardim da vida recebeu, morreu, do pé que brotou Maria, nem Margarida nasceu. Falei-me Deus, é o fim do nosso amor. Perdoa, por favor. Eu sei que o erro aconteceu, mas não sei o que fez tudo mudar de vez. Onde foi que eu errei? Eu só sei que amei, que amei, que amei, que amei. Será talvez que a minha ilusão foi dar meu coração com toda a força pra essa moça me fazer feliz. E o destino E foi assim que eu vi nosso amor na poeira, poeira. Outro na beleza fria de Maria. E o meu jardim ressecou.